are the essential considerations for global leaders? And so I'm going to begin with, this is a question I'll ask each one to give us a short answer to. And so the first question is, what are the unique challenges when leading a global organization? So Izzy.
Sure, Karen, thanks. Well, I think one of the obvious ones are the ability to balance sort of a global agenda as well as taking into consideration local approaches. Leaders really need to be able to manage the tension between the global agenda and how to truly customize it at the local level. And in order to do that, it really does pose an interesting, back and forth across the organization to truly be able to maximize and unlock the global agenda while being able to take advantage of local opportunities.
So balancing those two. Brian, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. So I would say challenge management might seem like an obvious one, but it's definitely a big one. We have several assignments going on at the moment that really present and really highlight the challenge of attracting and retaining and developing people in a global context. You really need to offer competitive compensation and benefits that are tailored to the local markets. You need to create career development programs and really give opportunities to, internal people who want international assignments. And your culture needs to attract. The company culture is really key when you're on the market. You also need to obviously have a good reputation therein, but also in terms of your work-life balance and your ability to attract candidates.
Okay, so some great suggestions there. And Dewey-Go, if you could answer that question as well.
Yeah, so one of the key challenges is the increased complexity, right? Because you go out of your rather familiar and, let's admit, relatively more of a comfort zone. And then all of a sudden, different cultures, values, differing ways of working, doing business, even the political climate, economic climate differences, they all join this game. So the global leader will now be more intensely exposed to all these different time zones and languages, different communication styles, indirect, direct, formal, informal. So understanding and acting upon these differences are key, and it takes time. So giving yourself that time is key. Another important thing I just wanted to mention is that, establishing the team spirit, maybe also referring back to Brian, but healthy alignment in mission, vision, and purpose is very, very difficult, but also extremely important. So driven by a common purpose so that the leader can diligently tackle with the challenges in a global organization as a senior leader.
Thank you for that. And by the way, while it might seem small, those time zone differences can really be challenging. So the next question, if you're moving from leading in just one country or one region, and then you move to a global role, what are important tips you would suggest to ensure success? So Izzy, give us give it a go.
Sure, Karen. I would piggyback a little bit on what was shared around uniting around a purpose. So much of the challenge that you have from moving from a regional to a global role is you're very comfortable in the regional understanding and where those differences are. However, the ability to be able to really rally around a common purpose or a common goal is so important, because ultimately there's going to have to be some degree of trade-offs between the regional agenda and the global agenda. And unless you have that sort of compass that you're pointing north and you're all aligned on it, it really makes those trade-offs and those discussions a lot more difficult. So if you can really, highlight how the work connects to the larger goal of the organization, I think you'll have a much better chance of success.
That's a great suggestion. Dewey-Go, what would you add?
Yeah, so I was thinking about a candidate, a placement actually, who then became a client, and I worked with him on various occasions, various searches, and I saw the trajectory of his career. So he was a country GM and then moved to a broad, rather regional role covering Europe. So it was a big P&L. And he shared how he needed to work on his mindset shift. So he was no longer, driving those country organizations, being too close to execution, but rather becoming a more of an enabler, the inspiring mentor, the guide, door opener, trying to eliminate obstacles, motivate, keep team engaged. All these concepts start to be more and more important. And he realized patience and active listening were getting extremely important so he needed to practice and get some coaching and really nail it. And this can be challenging if you're moving to a global role after overseeing a country or a region that is, and I'm coming, from Turkey, a country that is really can be a relatively more traditional, and it is at times difficult, for example, because there are a lot of firefighting to grow strategic thinkers. So country heads sometimes find their seats at the very top, cascading down all the decisions, and then all of a sudden when you're in a regional role or a global role, the world changes. So this change is massive, especially for those leaders. So they need to get other new tools from their toolkit in terms of skill sets and capabilities, because the previous ones may not really help them to that extent.
I love that idea of getting different tools out of your toolkit. So we've talked a bit about culture. I want to explore that a little bit more deeply. So if you look at cultural differences around the world, how do you look at the ethical considerations that global leaders keep in mind when there's different parts of the world? Something might be taboo in one country, but a common practice in another. So Brian, why don't you lead off the discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said earlier on in the introduction there, the brief introduction, I lived quite a few years in Japan. And as many people might know, that is a society that places a lot of value, for example, on hierarchy, formal business etiquette in interactions. So over there, the use of titles and surnames in meetings are very, very commonplace and very much respected. Bowing, for example, as well, as we all know, probably from Japanese culture, is the way they greet each other. So just being mindful of nonverbal cues like that, particularly in Japan, cues like silence in Japan, which can also be a form of communication. Obviously, this will juxtapose as well with the US. US values, obviously, direct communication, individualism, straightforwardness is appreciated, as well as just being clear and concise in your communication. I also just wanted to touch as well, perhaps on Chinese culture as well. We're doing quite a lot of work in China at present. And over there, there's this concept of face, or mianzi it's called, which is really crucial, where it's really about maintaining dignity and respect above all in social contexts. And that's really what's valued over there.
Okay, that's terrific. So there you go. On to you.
Yeah, I mean, not paying attention or not really understanding these cultural differences will have a negative impact on the ethical practices, and it automatically also impacts the reputation of the leader, the company they represent. And I was also thinking about the, similar Asian cultures, and I'm coming from a country that I'm close to both sides. And the gift-giving culture, for example, in East Asian countries, we see that it's quite welcomed, right, in business. At home, it's also quite welcomed. Whereas in others, you should be aware of the gift-giving etiquette, because it can be treated more like a bribery, etc. So it's so important. Similarly, from a human workforce angle, it's also extremely crucial. The labor practices can differ. So you may wish to be very careful in selecting your local supplier, for example, in a geography where unfortunately child labor can be present. So being very careful and diligent about making the right third-party selection is important, and it can, again, severely damage your reputation. All of a sudden, you end up in a huge crisis. And yeah, for example, another example I had in mind, and then I'll stay silent, but there are these cultural communication related differences as well. And for example, in France, there's a strict separation between private and work life. And when we work with, French clients, contacts, I became more careful because I'm coming from a country similar to US, where you can work as much as you want. It's actually really welcomed when showing that dedication to work. So it's a completely different way of seeing the way of working. So these things are crucial, I think. I want to quickly mention those.
So really, one of the things I'm getting from all of this is do your homework. Make sure you understand the local customs and the way they work, because they may be quite different from your own, and you can't assume that what you do is what everyone else does around the world. So doing your homework, I think, is really important.
Absolutely.
So let's focus on some of the positive opportunities of working in a global role. And so I'm going to switch out. Brian, why don't you start?
So yeah, I think one of the obvious ones is the opportunity to improve your knowledge of the world, of different cultures, geographies, histories even, as well as the opportunity to learn new languages. I certainly took advantage of that when I was living in various different countries as well. And that obviously helps an awful lot with communication on the ground and integration. It also shows, I think, respect to the culture that you're interacting with or that you're leading. You don't have to become fluent necessarily, or even, but learning the basics can definitely provide a deeper knowledge and appreciation for the local culture and local languages.
Okay, that's great. Do you go?
Yeah, if you are a person who's energized by learning new things, developing novel skills, impacting a broader audience across the globe, and then practicing influencing different stakeholders, because at these global levels, internally and externally, you're going to be exposed to top decision makers, and your stakeholder network will broaden. Then global role will be amazing for you. And in terms of personal development, you will hopefully end up with stronger cultural and learning agility. You'll get more resilient after all these, managing all these different crises across different geographies and various challenges at scale. And you will be more comfortable with ambiguity, with the VUCA circumstances, the volatile, ambiguous, complex, and uncertain circumstances. So very possibly, out of this journey, you'll become a better listener and more empathetic to individual differences, coming out of also respect, but a great opportunity to become a better version of yourself. Not the only road, of course, but it is a very solid journey.
So that's terrific. And Issa, you'll find that being last is always the challenge. But I have confidence in you. So what would you add to this, the rewarding aspect of leading in a global organization?
We'll pull an audible here. So, I think professional growth is really, especially if you're moving from the US, which is where I'm based, into an international role. So many times you have the opportunity to really build on your skill set that you wouldn't be able to in the larger sort of market that you're in. So as an example, when I was working on, in the US for a large company like Kraft, I had the opportunity to move to Central America, and I then truly had a GM role. If I had stayed in the US, I would have had parts of the P&L and dimensions there, but it wasn't until I really moved out in more of a global role, in an international role, where I truly had to develop different skill sets that I needed in that regional role than I would have if I had stayed in the US in the larger organization.
So these are, I think everyone's highlighted the opportunities for learning, growing, and developing. And so you're pulling out different tools in your toolkit. You're really doing your homework and research. You're learning and building new skills. And so it might be the difference between running a business and running a P&L, and learning those skills as well. So a lot of really great insights here. And so we're going to talk a little bit about establishing and communicating your value. So the first question is, how can executives tailor their communication style to resonate with a diverse global audience. So do you go? Do you go? I'm messing it up. Do we go? Now I got it.
Yeah, perfect. Well, it starts again with the right mindset, because it is a learning mindset. And that mindset welcomes all these differences and the challenges that come with it. Where we stand as leadership advisory consultants working with global executives today, we can see leaders who insist on a my way or the highway approach, my style more dominant. If they insist on that type of an approach, when it comes to communication, it's usually more of a set for failure. Or at least you will have various accidents, and they can sometimes be more, crucial and vital than others, or critical than others. These leaders, they need to adapt rather than expecting the world around them to adapt to their own communication style all the time. There's of course both sides approach towards each other, but it is very important to make that effort. Very basic, but for example, start with talking slowly and clearly. If you're a native speaker, like English native speaker, I'm not one of them, and the audience can be may not have that luxury to talk in their native language. So it is really important to make that effort, paying a bit more and showing patience, and even understanding the nonverbals, the body language. Especially for certain cultures, it's important. For example, there's a context I want to mention, which I find interesting: high context versus low context cultures. For example, high context cultures are where information is more implied, relies on body language, tone of voice, and I think I come from one of those cultures. Lots of hand talk like mine. But then there's also the low context culture where communication is explicit, quite straightforward, like in the US or Germany. So getting knowledgeable around these topics would help indeed.
Okay, terrific. And Brian, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you covered a lot of key points there indeed. But I do think it is important to tailor your communication style, particularly when dealing with different audiences. And one way to do that is to really do a self-assessment, essentially be honest with yourself regarding your own communication style, reflect on maybe feedback you've received in the past relating to your own style, and really understand how, you're coming across to your audience. Are there certain patterns perhaps in the responses that you're getting? And this is the kind of self-awareness really that's needed to make those adjustments. You can also obviously really actively listen to your audience and be open, I suppose, to learning from their experiences.
Yeah.
Great comments, active listening and being open. So the next question is, what are the critical competencies and traits for leaders to be successful in a global environment? And I understand that different roles require different competencies, but generally those that are successful in a global environment. So Izzy, you want to give that a first try?
Yeah, sure, Karen. I think here is one of the things I would highlight here would be really empowering a self-organization. So much of moving into global roles now, the ability to walk into somebody's office just down the, or check in very informal ways, you don't have that liberty anymore. So the ability to really create autonomy in decision-making across the organization, I mean, it's important in general, but I would emphasize it in these global roles, because you really do have to get to a point where you are trusting your team members even more so, especially since if you're in a global role, you're just not going to understand all of the local nuances. You're really going to have to rely on the expertise of the regional teams and their feedback, and just understand and learn how to ask the right questions in order for you to feel comfortable when you realize you're not going to be someone who completely is going to have the same breadth of understanding. The only other area I would also highlight is, again, around purpose. There's got to be this general sense of belonging, of being part of a broader team. That will help to break down silos across even different parts of the world or different functions that you may be leading. So aligning on that common purpose is also just a key dimension to bring the team in sync.